Heather, so glad to have you joining us today. It's been such a pleasure to learn about what you're doing in the ecosystem, especially around storytelling. We met through the Republic ecosystem, which is this amazing crowdfunding space for really kind of diverse founders as well. So I know we both have a deep passion for that, and I can't wait to dive in. To kick us off, I'd love if you could just share where are you calling in from today and what are you focused on these days?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm calling in from outside of Washington, D.C. in the burbs of the DMV area. What I'm focused on these days is actually we're having quite a significant pivot at Perfectly Pitched. We're now transitioning from a consulting company to a technology company. We're part of Techstars Atlanta, powered by JP Morgan, and we're building out a platform called SEMO, which will automate the branding, marketing, and pitching process for early stage founders.
I love that. I can't wait to dive into more of this, especially as we're seeing this emergence of AI and even like AI generated pitch decks. So I can totally imagine where this may or may not be going. And I'm sure you have some really interesting insights coming out of that. One of the first questions I always ask is just where did you ultimately get started? What was your first ever investment, whether that's time, energy, money, however you want to define that?
I've had a very unusual career, and I would say my very first investment in any kind of startup experience, I was 7 years old.
I
Uh,
love
um, I growing up, my parents always used to say I was born thinking I was a teenager, and I thought I was a 30 something by the time I was 10. So at age 7, I was bored a lot and I lived on an army post that had a bunch of kids running around. And we'd always get into trouble after school. So I, being very official as a little kid, I started an organization I called the Frog and Toad Club because we loved catching frogs and toads. But it had a full brand book. It had a little board of directors. We developed a partnership with the army. It was so much fun. And I thought, oh, let's form this into a proper corporation. And my little heart broke when I found out 7-year-olds couldn't own 501(c)(3) nonprofits. So yeah, but it ended up being a great test run for when I finally did get my own 501(c)(3) when I was 13.
I love these stories. I think real entrepreneur has something where they figured it out at a really young age. It's just part of your DNA of, wanting to be building something and bringing people together, which is a very creative process. And you really have had this through line of narrative through your whole career, right? It sounds like you built a narrative around frogs and toads as a young person. But then, across the board, right? Like I think no matter what was going on in your life, you have kind of evolved what the narrative of that is and how to create like community and belonging around it. So maybe you could share a little bit about how you got into your space. And I would love if you could share like a bit about the things that you built with like No Toes and the Dare Swim community. Like it's like, and then you were a fiction writer, you really focused on how do you take specific narratives and like redefine what they mean in the world.
Yeah, ever since I was a little kid, I've really believed in the power of storytelling to bring people together. It's how we tell our histories, it's how we see who we are as people and all the stories that we tell ourselves. And there's so much power in that. And that was really the source of my first official venture when I started an online newspaper for kids when I was 13, where I finally saw other kids my age falling in love with storytelling when the first Harry Potter book came out. And it was like I could finally see the light bulb going off in my peers of yes, stories matter and they carry so much power. And I thought if everybody's finally falling in love with reading, maybe I can also get them to fall in love with writing and the power of sharing your own story. So I started an online newspaper where kids could pretend to be columnists inside the world of Harry Potter, reporting on it as if it was true. And I thought it would just be a summer project, but it blew up, ran it for about 5 years, became that 501(c)(3) that I really wanted. And in building that community and sharing that love of storytelling, I learned a lot about, yes, how it brings people together and builds bonds where I'm still in touch with so many of those kids. They still feel like my own kids to me. And once you fall in love with that and you see the power that those stories can have to bring people together and change lives, it's addictive and no other job will ever measure up after that. So then when I started facing health issues in my own life, I started using that same power of storytelling to again bring people together. So I started a small organization called No Toes when I ended up losing my own big toe through a bone infection. Then, when I was diagnosed with a rare genetic disease at 19, my first impulse was to Google it. And I saw that there were zero results, literally none. And that's so isolating when that story isn't there to help guide you through a traumatic experience. So I partnered with the world's leading experts on that disease, translated medical journal articles into English and then layman's terms, and started a community around that. And really, like you said, the whole through line, as varied and all over the places my career has been, that through line is how stories can help make lives better.
I love that so much. When you think about now, like the role you play in the wealth space, right? And again, like wealth can mean all sorts of things, but especially on how you're helping people get their projects funded, right? The things that they want to see in the world to exist, to get the resources to make them really real in the world. What is the role you're playing now? Maybe you could share a bit about the platform, but also what you've done in the past, and then how you're thinking about your role in Republic. Like when startups come, who are you sort of focused on, and how are you bringing them into that world of the crowdfunding space?
Yeah. I like to say that I tripped and fell into helping people with their pitch decks because I certainly did not think that was a niche I'd ever find myself in. I got into it because I was a fellow in the very first cohort of the Halcyon Incubator in DC back in 2014, and I'd never pitched to investors before that. This was my first tech startup, the first time I couldn't just bootstrap my way through it. But my background in storytelling and design meant that I took to pitching rather quickly, at least as far as the narrative and the pitch deck design. And they were so pleased with the progress of my own pitch that they kept asking me to come back almost every cohort since then to help different founders formulate their story and generate a beautiful pitch deck that was deeply meaningful and could help them, achieve their goals. And every single time I'd come back, Halcyon would tell me, you should turn this into a company. And I, for years, kept saying, nah, who'd hire me for that? I'm not qualified for that. I've never raised an investment round. What the heck? And then finally, after years of this, I talked to some of the founders I'd helped, and they'd said, I won South by Southwest with your deck. I won CES with your deck. And I went, maybe I am qualified. What the heck? And then finally, Halcyon repeated the call and said, you should turn this into a company. And by the way, we'll hire you. And I thought, okay, if I've got a client ready to go, why not? I'll dive in. It'll be a fun diversion, whatever. And so I developed some classes for Halcyon. I supported their opportunity intensives program. And it just kind of like the Daily Prophet, the Harry Potter site, it just kept growing despite my, intentions for it to be a short-term thing. And I started to see how so many entrepreneurs get so thick into the weeds of what they're doing and so busy that it can be really hard to step outside of that, know how to tell your story, and do it concisely, quickly, and efficiently for an audience who knows nothing but could be the key to your next big milestone being achieved. And that can be such a hard thing for a lot of founders to do, especially highly technical founders. So it made me realize that everything I've done that I always take for granted was actually very valuable and could be the key to helping people's startup dreams come true. So I started working on that, taking on other outside clients. And throughout the process of that last year, I was working with a company working on their Series A. And he said to me, my startup took off when I figured out what my superpower was and knew how to automate it. And he said, Heather, if you ever figure out how to automate storytelling, you'll be unstoppable. And that planted a seed. And I started thinking about it. It took about 6 months, but I finally figured out how to do it. And that's why we're now a technology company, is that we're building that automated platform that will help early stage founders figure out what their messaging is, develop a brand, make that cohesive across all of their marketing materials, and then automate the story that'll make their pitch deck compelling.
I love that. And what has been the most unusual or like surprising thing that you've learned as you've been helping all of these entrepreneurs think about their narratives? Is there something that emerged that you would want other people to know?
Yeah, the most surprising thing to me, we're all aware of like the big, ugly ways that bias keeps venture capital from reaching women and minorities and all the underrepresented founders that collectively get far less than 10% of venture capital. And the surprising thing to me that I've learned over the past year and a half are all of the little subtle ways that each of us are conditioned through society to minimize ourselves, diminish ourselves, and introduce doubt that show up in a million and one tiny little pieces that all together diminish our opportunities. For instance, I catch myself doing this all the time, even though I constantly coach other women on not doing this. When you're doing your pitch, how often do you say, hopefully we'll get to this milestone? We hope to get here. If we get this investment, we'll do X. Straight white men don't do that. They go in there with confidence and they say, we will do X, we will do Y. And it's such a small, tiny little subconscious thing, but all of those little tiny subconscious things add up. And it can be so hard to train yourself out of those learned behaviors of diminishment and self-doubt.
It's so funny. It's so interesting because I recently did this exercise or cohort called Camera Ready, which is all about how you position yourself in the world. And one of the tips that came out from this amazing teacher, Carmina, is the idea of like an alter ego. And Beyonce has Sasha Fierce, and in a way, it's like, how do you have this alter ego of that like white 20-something-year-old man when you go into it? You need to like identify, almost like create that in yourself, because it's so true. Using words as powerful instead of like if, but when, or hope and like will, it's really just subtle shifts. And you're totally right. It becomes so ingrained, and sometimes stepping into an alter ego can just allow you to mentally behave in a different way and present in a different way and tell stories in a different way. And I just thought that was like a really powerful resource and such a great point that you bring up. Is there a person or a company that's really inspiring you in the space? And why?
Yeah, a couple of things, but the first one that jumps out is a lovely, amazing woman named Cindy Gallup. I met her through LinkedIn, and to me, she's the perfect epitome of what you're talking about, that alter ego, where you just decide, I'm going to decide to have confidence now and put myself out there and talk about things that no one else wants to talk about, and I'm going to own it. And she's amazing with that. She has a great talk where she talks about how once she hit a certain age, she just decided, I'm done caring what everyone else thinks. I'm going to do my own thing. And here she's in an industry that is full of social stigma, full of all sorts of risk, can't get venture financing, but she's going to step in there and challenge everybody and make it happen and ultimately make society better because of it. And I love a ballsy woman like that. It just makes me happy. And I'm trying my best to learn from her and adopt the same attitude now. Because I think if all women did that earlier in life, the world would be a much better place.
And all people, honestly, if we could all just internally just, let go of some of that fear, kind of own whatever is true for us, and like know that we're creators of this reality rather than like victims of the things that make us scared, or the stories we've been told, or the stories that we tell ourselves. Especially on the power of narrative, you of all people like know, your internal narrative is just as important as whatever your external narrative is. And so what advice would you give to somebody getting started? What are you telling founders today when they're in this environment, the macro environment, the equity fundraising environment has become a lot more tight. And so it's, super important to be really thoughtful about how you're going out and presenting and approaching that, and how to navigate, that level of like sort of difficulty that has definitely escalated. What advice are you giving to founders right now to navigate?
One thing I always love to start with is get creative. There's always another way to do something. Anytime someone tells you this is the way you should do it, look for holes in that, poke holes in that, find ways to stand out, because if you're just doing the same thing everyone else is doing, you're going to blend in. So find any opportunity to get creative. Second, I would say, again, it comes back to that confidence, and flipping that narrative that a lot of founders have, where they go into an investment meeting desperate, and they go in thinking, I really need that money. That person's doing me a favor. Oh gosh, I need that so bad. Flip that on its head. You're the founder who came up with something innovative and something exciting and something that could make a great deal of money. That investor should be begging you. You are presenting them with an invitation, an opportunity to help you do something really amazing. They should feel lucky to invest in you. And if you go in there and you have the stats to back it up and you've done the research and it's all solid, they will feel that excitement and be just as grateful to be part of your journey.
I love that advice a lot. I think one of the aspects that I also try to mention to founders is that numbers also have narrative. And so like you kind of, sometimes people think like, oh, I'm not good at math, or I don't want to talk about numbers. And it's like, well, actually numbers also tell a story. And it's part of our obligation as founders or like stewards of anything that we're making in the world to know the story of the numbers that are behind it too. And that can be really liberating and powerful to feel like a confidence in how you're thinking about the path to revenue in the future. And sometimes I think when people are building out their financial models, they get so stuck because they can't first imagine the narrative. What is the narrative you're trying to tell in what you'll have as numbers? And then you put the numbers in. It's not like they're just going to miraculously appear and then tell you the narrative. Do you know what I mean? Like you show up to the Excel file, just like you show up to the Word doc with a blank slate, and then you come up with the narrative and you design on top of that. And so I think that can be just a really empowering feeling to say, like, I know the story of my numbers as much as I know the story of my pitch deck, and they go together. And in this world where, the numbers are going to become more and more important to help drive the belief, it's a cool place to kind of stand in and empower yourself. And to your point, narratives we might have heard from being very young that girls aren't good at math or science or whatever it is, or shouldn't be. So I love this so much. I can't wait to see how you now build this into this tech platform, because there's just been so much thoughtfulness in the steps and the ways of constructing storytelling, and to put that into a way that can actually be scalable for so many more people is going to be really special. So do you have any other advice or anything else that we should know? How do we follow you personally as you're developing this as a founder? And then how do we follow your new tech solution, which I don't know if it's going to be named something differently, or how you're thinking about how that presents in the world?
Yeah, you can always follow me on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active there, getting more active. So Heather Lawver or Perfectly Pitched Inc. The platform will have a different name. We're actually really excited to be working with an absolute legend in the brand and marketing space to develop the logo. But I can tell you the company will be called CMO, your fully automated chief marketing officer. So check out perfectlypitched.co to follow those details, and on LinkedIn, and we'll have announcements about a pretty new logo soon.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining today. This has been such a pleasure, and we will definitely be following along. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day.